All right, let's jump right into this explainer and start our story in the autumn of 1986 at what was essentially the absolute rock bottom of Manchester United's history. I want you to really imagine this scene here. We're talking about one of the most historic, prestigious football clubs in all of England. For my American viewers, think of them like the Dallas Cowboys or the New York Yankees of the sport, and they are facing total, unmitigated ruin. They were sitting second from the bottom of the old First Division, staring directly down the barrel of relegation to a lower league. And you have to understand, this wasn't just a temporary slump or a bad month. It was a devastating systemic collapse for a club that literally hadn't won a league championships since 1967. The mythical glory days of legends like George Best and Sir Bobby Charlton, well, those felt like ancient, completely untouchable history. Inside Old Trafford, that historic stadium they call the Theatre of Dreams, the pressure was just suffocating. The fans were furious, the board was in full panic mode, and the team was just falling apart at the seams.
And you know what made this championship drought so incredibly agonizing for the fans? It was what was happening just 30 miles down the road. While Manchester United was drowning in what would ultimately become a massive 25-year title drought, their fiercest historic rivals, Liverpool, were out there building an absolute empire. The contrast was staggering, and it absolutely haunted Manchester. I mean, look at the numbers. Over a 20-year period, Liverpool secured 11 league titles and 7 European trophies. They were conquering the continent time and time again. Meanwhile, Manchester United managed to scrape together just 3 domestic cups in that same time frame. They were entirely living in the shadow of their biggest rival. It was a crumbling institution that was absolutely desperate for a savior to come in, steady the ship, and restore their honor.
So, when a 44-year-old manager named Alex Ferguson walks through the doors at Old Trafford to take on that incredibly heavy mantle, he is hit with an immediate and massive culture shock. He inherited a roster with undeniable world-class talent, guys like Norman Whiteside, Paul McGrath, and Brian Robson, true superstars of the era. But they completely and utterly lacked discipline. Physical fitness was literally an afterthought. Instead, this deeply toxic, destructive drinking and partying culture was just ingrained in the locker room. It was basically an open secret that the players ran the club. They were living this relaxed, almost country club lifestyle where late nights out at the pub were way more common than extra hours on the training pitch. It was a totally unsustainable environment for winning, and Ferguson knew right then and there that it had to be eradicated. Instantly.
Section 1. The Edge of Ruin, a manager forged in the shipyards.
To survive this massive culture shock and reign in a locker room full of out-of-control superstars, United didn't just need a smart tactician. They needed a relentless disciplinarian who'd been forged in a much harsher, unforgiving environment. And that was Alex Ferguson. Born in 1941 in the gritty, working-class district of Govan in Glasgow, Scotland, he was the son of a shipbuilder. He actually worked in those exact same shipyards himself as an apprentice toolmaker, all while playing as a tough, highly physical forward on the weekends. He even became a union shop steward. That union leader mentality, that demand for absolute solidarity, and that fiery, uncompromising self-belief, he carried all of that right into his managerial career. He actually started managing at East Stirlingshire at just 32 years old, taking a part-time gig paying £40 a week for a club that, incredibly, didn't even have a single goalkeeper on the roster. But his true proving ground, where he really built his mythological status, was at Aberdeen in the late 70s and 80s. There, he did the absolute impossible. He utterly shattered the historic Celtic and Rangers duopoly in Scotland, winning 3 Scottish League championships, 4 Scottish Cups, and he even won a UEFA Cup Winners' Cup by beating the mighty Real Madrid. So by the time he arrived in Manchester, he was already a hardened, undeniable winner.
Section 2. Forging a working-class culture, eradicating the party, and restoring pride.
Upon his arrival, Ferguson didn't just walk in and start yelling at guys. He methodically and ruthlessly overhauled the club's entire DNA from the top down. First on the chopping block, that destructive drinking culture. He confronted the biggest stars directly, demanding peak physical fitness and instilling a frankly terrifying standard of constant improvement. Second, he took a huge gamble. He tapped into the club's historic tradition of the Busby Babes and drastically prioritized youth development. This bold move is what ultimately birthed the legendary class of '92, featuring absolute icons of the game like David Beckham, Paul Scholes, Gary Neville, and Ryan Giggs. On top of that, he brought in forward-thinking coaches and implemented early sports science and mobility training to prevent injuries. He wasn't just coaching a team out there. He was modernizing an entire multi-million-dollar institution from the ground up, demanding that every single employee match his relentless work ethic.
And every grueling training session, every controversial youth call-up, every furious locker room rant, it was all meticulously designed to break one thing: that agonizing 25-year league title drought that hung over Old Trafford like a dark, suffocating cloud. And finally, in the 1992-93 season, under the bright lights and immense pressure of the newly formed Premier League, Ferguson did the impossible. The curse was broken, the 25-year wait was finally over, and the floodgates for Manchester United were officially open.
Section 3. Building the First Dynasty. Conquering the 1990s. With that cultural foundation firmly set in stone, Ferguson built his first truly great roster. And this era peaked in spectacular, almost cinematic fashion, with the historic 1999 treble. Manchester United won the Premier League, the FA Cup, and the UEFA Champions League, all in a single, grueling, dramatic season. For my American fans watching, imagine winning the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the NBA Finals all in the span of a few weeks. It's just wild. It was the first continental treble ever achieved by an English club, and it's widely considered the holy grail of world football. Fueled by these dramatic, heart-stopping last-minute goals that birthed the enduring legend of Fergie time, this terrifying idea that his team simply never stopped attacking until the final whistle blew, United cemented themselves as the undisputed kings. They were the most dominant, feared team in all of Europe.
So the big question is, how do you maintain that level of absolute dominance without getting complacent? Well, the people who knew him noted a terrifying, almost sickness-level psychological drive. Just listen to the words used to describe his mindset right after winning it all. Once the final whistle blows, you celebrate for a night, but there's almost like an anticlimax. He was straight into the next thing. Ferguson was absolutely incessant. He realized a fundamental truth of sports psychology. If you keep the exact same group of players after achieving the ultimate victory, their motivation will inevitably fade. The hunger just dies. He knew he needed new blood, new friction, and new challenges to keep the fire burning.
Section 4. The Art of the Rebuild. Tearing down to win again. This psychological drive led to his true managerial genius, a ruthless, four-step dynasty mindset that allowed him to completely defy the natural life cycle of a sports team. Step 1. Win major trophies. Step 2. Ruthlessly sell your key star players. Seriously, over the years, Ferguson absolutely shocked the footballing world by offloading absolute legends at the very peak of their popularity. He sold huge fan favorites like Paul Ince, Mark Hughes, Andrei Kanchelskis, David Beckham, and eventually his own captain Roy Keane. Step 3. Integrate hungry new youth and emerging unproven superstars like Cristiano Ronaldo and Wayne Rooney right alongside new defensive anchors like Nemanja Vidic and Patrice Evra. And then, Step 4. Win again. By constantly rotating the roster and deliberately injecting instability, he ensured the hunger and motivation inside that locker room never, ever died.
Now, I don't want to make it sound like this was easy. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just difficult, it was incredibly risky. It wasn't always this smooth, upward trajectory. Ferguson himself openly admitted that offloading his rock-solid star defender Joop Stam to Lazio in 2001 was a massive error, famously calling it the single biggest mistake of his entire time at the club. And during this tricky transition period in the mid-2000s, United genuinely struggled. Arsene Wenger's Invincibles at Arsenal and Jose Mourinho's newly wealthy, ultra-dominant Chelsea were having their big moments, winning titles and dominating the headlines. The media began to loudly and aggressively question if the great Alex Ferguson had finally lost his touch. There were literally front-page columns claiming he was shredding his legacy by staying on the job too long.
Section 5. The final masterpiece, silencing the doubters in Moscow.
But despite that intense, unrelenting media criticism claiming his time was up and his legendary status was crumbling, Ferguson was quietly and meticulously laying the foundation for his greatest super team yet. The cinematic climax of this ultimate rebuild arrived on May 21, 2008. Under the suffocating global spotlight and the torrential, freezing, pouring rain of Moscow's Luzhniki Stadium, his newly assembled roster faced off against a brutal, heavily favored Chelsea squad. They were playing for ultimate European glory in the Champions League final. The stakes literally could not have been higher.
Hours before kickoff, in that freezing Moscow rain, facing the absolute biggest match of their lives, Ferguson didn't talk tactics with his team. He didn't pull out a whiteboard and draw formations. He talked about character. Defender Rio Ferdinand recalled one of Ferguson's greatest, most emotional team talks. He emotionally anchored his players by transporting these wealthy, global superstars back 50 years to the working-class shipyards of Glasgow. He talked deeply about their own diverse backgrounds, their families, and the incredible, painful struggles it took for every single one of them to reach this pinnacle. And then he looked at them and asked, How can you not give me 90 minutes of your life now?" Ferdinand later said that speech made him want to literally run through doors for his manager. Ferguson extracted absolutely everything they had in their souls, and they won that night in Moscow, securing his second Champions League title.
Section 6. A legacy set in stone. The unbeatable record.
After Moscow, Ferguson pushed forward to capture a final dramatic league title fueled by the blockbuster signing of Robin van Persie in the 2012-2013 season. And then he finally stepped away, leaving behind a resume of completely untouchable statistics. He secured a staggering 13 Premier League championships. He didn't just beat his rivals, he systematically broke their spirit. He elevated Manchester United from a struggling relegation-threatened club into a financial and sporting juggernaut on the global stage.
In total, he amassed 38 major trophies during his incredible 26-year reign solely at Manchester United. It is a transformation unlike anything else in modern sports, right? Taking a club that was second from the bottom of the league, drowning in a toxic drinking culture, and molding them into the most recognizable sporting titan on the entire planet. And when you zoom out to look across his entire managerial career, from those humble beginnings at St. Mirren to the absolute miracle at Aberdeen to the sprawling empire at Manchester United, he won an unbelievable 49 total trophies. 49! This mind-blowing tally makes Sir Alex Ferguson the single most successful manager in the entire history of football. Which brings us to a final, pretty provocative thought to wrap up this explainer. As we look at the high turnover, hyper-commercialized, instant gratification landscape of modern football today, a world where managers are routinely sacked after just a few bad months, and club loyalty is basically non-existent, we really have to ask ourselves, is it even possible for one manager to sustain a 26-year dynasty like this ever again? Sir Alex Ferguson was a working-class shipbuilder who forged an international empire through pure will, terrifying discipline, and a ruthless, unyielding desire to rebuild. And honestly, as the sport continues to evolve, it's highly likely we will never, ever see anything quite like him again.